Alrighty. Hi, everyone. I'd like to let's get started and welcome you all to the Guide to Higher Learning, an educational webinar about cannabis brought to you by March and Ash, a licensed dispensary based in San Diego with 4 locations in Vista, Mission Valley, City Heights, and Imperial Valley. My name is Kayla. I'm a part of the March and Ash team, and I'll be your moderator this afternoon. One very important part of our mission at March and Ash is education. Even though cannabis is becoming legalized across many parts of the world, we find there are still certain stigmas and mindsets attached. We hope that by providing educational resources such as this webinar will not only help our customers, but those who may not be familiar with cannabis, and thus provide a new wellness tool into people's lives and help destigmatize the plant. Today, we are presenting the first part of our educational series, A Guide to Higher Education. And we'll introduce you to some of the basics of cannabis, including the endocannabinoid system, different types of cannabinoids, terpenes, the entourage effect, and the differences between sativa and indica. A quick disclaimer though, this content is for adults age 21 and over, and it is for educational purposes only. So after this 12-minute presentation, we will open the floor to viewer questions. As you're watching, you can write down questions or simply use that chat box feature at the bottom of your screen and type out any questions that come into mind. At the end of our presentation, we will take your questions live. The speaker in our presentation is Anna, and she will be the one to address your questions. So without further ado, let's enjoy the presentation.
Hey all, I'm Anna. Let's get started. First, we're going to talk about the endocannabinoid system, or the ECS. So the endocannabinoid system is a complex signaling system within our body that helps to maintain balance, or homeostasis. Homeostasis is the body's ability to regulate and maintain an internal environment. There are 3 main components to the ECS, or endocannabinoid system. We have the endocannabinoids, receptors, and enzymes. Endocannabinoids are the molecules produced by our body throughout our lifetime that are similar to the cannabinoids found within the cannabis plant. The endocannabinoid system responds to stress at a cellular level, making it one of the most important systems to maintain health. Receptors are the docking sites on the surface of the cell that the cannabinoids can attach to. Think of the endocannabinoids and receptors as a key and lock system. So if the endocannabinoids are a key and the receptor is a lock, when they interact with each other, that is what ultimately produces a biological response within the body. The 2 primary cannabinoid receptors are CB1 and CB2. The CB1 receptors are found mostly in the brain and central nervous system. This is the receptor site that actually causes the intoxicating feelings that we experience from cannabis. CB2 receptors are mostly found in the peripheral nervous system, so that's anything that comes out of the brain and the spinal cord, as well as in immune cells. In 1963 and 1964, Dr. Raphael Mechoulam isolated THC and CBD, a huge discovery for science, as well as a spark that allowed a lot of other scientists to go out there to discover what it was inside of our own bodies that processed these molecules. So, what are the different types of cannabinoids? We will be briefly discussing 2 of them, endocannabinoids and phytocannabinoids. Now, endo means inside, so endocannabinoids are the ones that are internally produced by our body. These are the molecules that interact with the endocannabinoid system to produce different biological effects. The second type of cannabinoid we will be discussing is phytocannabinoids. So phyto means plant, so for our purposes, we are talking about cannabinoids that are produced by the cannabis plant. Phytocannabinoids are the naturally occurring compounds that closely mimic the cannabinoids that are produced inside of our body. These compounds bind to receptor sites throughout the body and produce different physiological effects. Understanding the different effects that each cannabinoid produces can help us to best choose the product that suits our needs. There are over 100 cannabinoids that are found within the cannabis plant, and today we'll be talking about a few different types of them. First is THC, or tetrahydrocannabinol. This is the most common cannabinoid found within the cannabis plant. It is also the most well-researched cannabinoid. THC is the most common compound produced in cannabis varieties that are bred for both recreational and medicinal use. THC is ultimately responsible for the intoxicating feelings that most of us associate with the cannabis plant. And THC's effects can vary from person to person. They can also vary within one person's experience. Next is THCA, or tetrahydrocannabinolic acid. So THCA is the inactive state of THC. So THCA, when it goes through decarboxylation, creates THC. THCA also has the same benefits as THC without any of the intoxicating effects. CBD is the second most produced cannabinoid within the cannabis plant, and it is the most produced non-intoxicating cannabinoid. When you take CBD and THC together, CBD has the potential to decrease the intoxicating effects of THC. Now, CBD does not interact with the CB1 or CB2 receptors, but it has been shown to decrease the activity at those receptor sites. A lesser known cannabinoid is THCV, or tetrahydrocannabivarin. This cannabinoid has been shown to increase energy and decrease appetite. This cannabinoid is rarely found in substantial quantities in flower, but it is responsible for about 25% of the psychoactivity felt from THC. A cannabinoid that is recently increasing in popularity is Cannabinol, or CBN. So CBN is what happens to THC as it is exposed to air, light, and time. Now, CBN is less psychoactive than THC itself, but it is highly sedative. Next, we'll be discussing terpenes. Terpenes are the fragrant oils in cannabis that give them their smell and flavor. They also ultimately mitigate how cannabinoids affect us. Now, terpenes exist everywhere in the plant kingdom, not just cannabis. Aromatic notes like floral, pine, diesel, chocolatey, those are all scents that come from terpenes. There are over 120 terpenes that have been identified just within the cannabis plant, but again, they exist everywhere in the plant kingdom. Terpenes are believed to determine how the composition of certain cannabinoids affect us, with certain smells being attributed to certain effects. Now that we've discussed phytocannabinoids and terpenes, let's talk about what happens when they come together. This is known as the entourage effect or ensemble effect. The entourage effect or ensemble effect is what happens when multiple compounds work together to create a specific effect, as compared to what would happen if an isolated compound was by itself. Multiple compounds out in nature work together in a synergistic way, so to remove one of them can potentially diminish the potential effects. This phenomena is being independently studied by scientists in its application to terpenes and cannabinoids. It is believed that terpenes and cannabinoids together maximize the potential of cannabis within our body. For example, in numerous studies, it has been shown that THC works better when there's a minute amount of CBD present. And the same can be said for CBD. When there is a minute amount of THC present, it enhances the potential effects of the cannabinoid. Let's talk about some cannabis terminology. Now, cannabis is a plant with three main species: sativa, indica, and ruderalis. The most common ways to grow cannabis are indoor, outdoor, light-deprived, and greenhouse. For decades, cannabis has been described as sativa and indica. Now, as we understand more of the subtle properties of the plant, we're really beginning to understand that those two categorizations do not fully encompass the potential of the plant. These two broad categories of cannabis have been hybridized over hundreds of years and several continents, and many of them no longer carry the physical characteristics or chemical structure that they did once. We often refer to the many hybrid types of cannabis as sativa dominant or indica dominant, depending on the genetics of the plant. This categorization of the plant gets even more confusing when we consider the fact that there is no scientifically agreed upon definition of sativa or indica. Needing a way to talk about and describe the plants, the popular classification and differences of traits between sativa and indica is still widely used. While there are emerging systems that help to clarify this ambiguity, it is not widely used and they are still emerging. Sativas are usually described as having energizing, uplifting, and euphoric type of effects. Many people may use them to elevate their mood, enhance creativity, or to enjoy in social settings. Sativa strains tend to have sweet, fruity, bright, floral notes. Indicas are usually referred to as having relaxing, sedating, and pain-relieving properties. A lot of indicas have earthy, funky, cheesy, and even diesel-y smells. Remember that because of breeding and genetics, these labels should not be solely relied upon in order to discern effects. The vast majority of flowers that are on the market are hybrids that may have either sedating or energizing effects. In conclusion, we want to remind everyone that the effects of cannabis cannot be generalized across the population. Everybody is different, and cannabis needs to be treated as the unique entity that it is. As we begin to develop our relationship with cannabis, it's really important to remember that it can affect everyone differently if you consume different strains, if you change how you consume, and what is the dose that you are consuming. When understood and harnessed appropriately, these are some of the most important factors that we can use to our advantage as we understand what works best for us.
There we go. All right, everybody. So that concludes our video presentation. We're going to bring Anna here onto the screen. So Anna, whenever you're ready to turn on your camera, she will start to address some of these questions that we have here in the chat box. Just give us 1 second. While we get this figured out. There we go. All right, great. So this is Anna. She was our lovely presenter in the video, and she's an educator at March and Ash. So everyone, please feel free to start plugging away your questions there in the Q&A, and she will have all these great answers for you. So let's get started. I'll start to pick out some of these. So let's see. A question from Paul. He asked, how soon before we start seeing THC levels at 40% or higher on flower? Anna, your thoughts?
Ooh, that is a very high percentage to have in a flower, I will say straight out. The plant itself has changed so much of what it used to be, even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, because of human manipulation and what we have done with the breeding and how we're growing it. So, 30 years ago, back in the 60s, let's even say, the THC percentages were likely very low, anywhere from 6% to 12%, if even that. And that was good for some people, not great for some people. That's one of the things about cannabis. Some people need a very small amount, some people need a large amount. And we can talk more about that at some point if we like. But as far as 40%, I'm not a grower, so I can't specifically say as far as a time frame, but I can definitely tell you that I have seen some flowers out there that test 35, 36. So I imagine with the technology that we have now and more that we're understanding about the actual plant itself, that we can manipulate it further. Now, with that being said, there are still products out there that are going to have a higher percentage of THC, just not in a flower form. So say you have a pre-roll that has oil on it and kief, suddenly the percentage might have been 20 to 25 with just the flower, and suddenly it's at 47. So there are other options outside of flower, but I can definitely understand wanting to have high percentage flower.
Absolutely. And it's true. I mean, I've definitely seen products that have gone up to 32%. Who knows? Maybe that 40% is around the corner somewhere. That is a high percentage for flower, though. Thank you for that question, Paul. We'll go on to the next question. Are CBN products considered the most effective for sleep?
Because everybody's endocannabinoid system is so unique to them, it is almost impossible to say blanket wise that CBN would be the most effective for sleep. If someone is specifically targeting sleep, we try to ask them, have you used cannabis before? If you have, has anything worked for you for sleep? And then depending on how that person wants to go about it, because there are some people that might not want to feel a strongly intoxicating effect from THC in order to fall asleep. But then there are some people that do want that. And because of the different cannabinoids that we have available, you could potentially take CBN and THC together. Now, because CBN is less psychoactive for most people than THC, that is going to give you a less intoxicating effect. But then say we take CBD and CBN, because CBD for most people has no intoxicating effect and CBN has very little, that could be 0 to no intoxicating effect for most people. So it's an open-ended question, which I always tell people that you are your own personal scientific experiment. You might need to try a couple of things while you're targeting something to find the best product for you at the best dose, and most likely what time to take it, especially if we're going to sleep.
Right. Well, there was another question too about sleep. So on top of that, what are some of the products that you recommend people try when they are experimenting with, what works best for them and creating that drowsiness for bedtime?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we have, as human beings, we have a multitude of different ways that we have issues with sleep. So are you the type of person that, you lay in bed and your mind just races and you just lay there for hours and you can't fall asleep? Or are you the type of person that falls asleep like the dead for a moment and then in a couple hours you wake up and you can't get back to sleep? Because there are potentially products that could help a person with either or of those issues or even both. And again, because everybody is so different, it's hard to say exactly what the best product is, blanket again. But then we can lean on delivery systems so that we can try and figure out what works best for us. So say somebody smokes flower before they go to sleep, but then and they go to sleep,
Mhm.
key, right?
Mhm.
So that's a success, but then they do the thing and they wake up in a few hours. So perhaps for that person, taking edibles or a tincture might be a better way to go because that delivery system allows the cannabinoids to stay in your body for a longer period of time. That's why, when you eat an edible, it might take 45 minutes to kick in, but then you're most likely going to feel that for 6 to 8 hours, maybe even more. So thinking about what you are targeting and how you sleep, that's ultimately going to give you the best idea of how you might go about it. And just like I said before, you might need to try a couple of different things to find what works best for you. But I always tell people not to get frustrated on it. We just have variables to play with.
Absolutely. There's so many different types of products to try. So, yes.
Okay.
um, Staying along the lines of the different types of cannabinoids, we touched on CBN. We have a question here about THCV. So, could you remind us again, what is THCV, and are those products becoming easier or harder to come by?
So THCV is tetrahydrocannabivarin. It is not found in large quantities in flower as it is naturally grown. So there are growers out there that are manipulating the genetics of the plant in order to increase the amount that the plant will produce THCV. So you are generally finding more THCV based products out there. Now, whether that might be solely THCV, I don't really see anything that is just THCV because in general, it only gives you about 25% of the intoxicating effects. And most people are still looking for some of those effects. So you generally see it paired with CBD, THC, or both of those things. But we're definitely seeing more of them on the market. We carry the level blends.
Mhm.
They have a wonderful THCV product called Stimulate. Highly recommend it. That is one of these products that is a 1:1:1 ratio. It has THCV, THC, and CBD now.
Nice.
Yeah. And I've also seen a couple of vapes out there that are THCV based as well. So it's definitely an upcoming thing as we understand more about how we can manipulate the plant itself.
Right. And isolating these different cannabinoids is kind of new, right? Up until recently, from the presentation with THC and CBD isolated.
Absolutely. Because as the plant grows, like I was saying with THCA has to go through a decarboxylation when we are actually smoking it. But in the plant itself, if we're talking about the raw plant, all of the cannabinoids that we are talking about are in their acidic form. So extracting them because they're so fragile and they're not necessarily produced in the same way that THC is can be super difficult. Yeah.
Mhm. Is So the cannabinoid that reduces appetite, we mentioned that in the presentation. Which one is that? One of our viewers was wondering. You said it was rare in flower.
Yep, and that is THCV. It is known to decrease appetite and increase energy.
Awesome. That's wonderful. Okay, so let's see. We have some more questions. So, if strains are somewhat unreliable in determining effects, what is a better attribute to look out for when choosing a product?
That would definitely be the smell. So terpenes are what give marijuana their smell and flavor, but they ultimately are what mitigate or how we react to cannabis. They are what determine that. Now, because again, everybody receives all of the active components of cannabis so differently, this is one of these instances where this person smokes this strain that we believe to be an indica, but suddenly they get a sativa feeling. There's a lot of this that we don't necessarily understand. I'll be honest. We're still learning so much, and that's part of the exciting part of it. Um, but the smells. So thinking about what it is you're trying to target, and then smell the flower. I know that's a little bit hard now with COVID, and a lot of dispensaries, including our own, we do not allow you to get super close to the flower for safety purposes. So that is difficult right now. But because terpenes themselves mitigate how we receive the plant, understanding what your body responds best to, that's ultimately going to be the best determining factor. So I know we've all had this experience. We go to the dispensary and we've got like 3 jars in front of us and we're smelling them. And in general, weed smells good across the board to everybody. But there's those ones that you smell and you're like, that feels that's like made for me. I just know that there is something in there. Our body has wonderful mechanisms in it that are actually telling us that might be helpful. So as you are going around looking at different strains, smelling different strains, pay attention to the ones that your body really reacts to. And as you smoke it, pay attention to how you're receiving it. That your own personal experience is ultimately going to be the best determining factor on what does and does not do good for you. So just keep smelling. Keep smelling.
Definitely. Yes. A lot of people don't know about terpenes. That's, kind of something that's, becoming more popular, especially on different packaging, with some of these different brands that are sold at March and Ash. They'll actually list out the terpene content. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about just a few of the different terpenes that you know of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Renewal and so on and so forth. I'll let you take it away.
Yeah. I mean, if you wanna pitch in, girl, anytime. So terpenes themselves, there's actually about 30,000 of them out there in the plant world. There's also some in bacteria, which is very interesting. 20,000 exist in the plant kingdom just by itself. And then we know of 120 different ones in terpenes, and I'm sure that we're going to learn more about them as we understand more about the subtle nature of the plant. And terpenes themselves can also present in different forms. So we've got things like monoterpenes, sesquiterpenes, things like that. But couple of terpenes, pinene, that is the most abundant terpene out in nature. That's the ones that are found in pine needles. They also exist in rosemary. That is one of the terpenes that has different states, like an alpha and beta, and those 2 states actually smell very different. Ooh, hello. Pine needles, rosemary, most out there in the world. Beta smells like basil and rosemary, and alpha usually smells more like the pine needles that we find out in nature. And pinene actually is one of these terpenes that crosses the blood-brain barrier very easily. So our body absorbs it very, very easily. Another one, myrcene, that is the second most abundant in cannabis, I believe. And that is also found in mangoes, hops, lemongrass. That's all I can remember. Maybe cardamom as well. Cardamom's out there. And it has antibiotic, analgesic, so pain relieving properties. And it is, oh, hello, puppy. It also has very sedating and couch locking type of effects. This is also another terpene that can cross the blood barrier very, very easily. So we feel it very soon. We've also got something like limonene, which is found in almost all citruses out there, really bright scents, things like Jack Herrera, or something like linalool, which exists in lavender. If anybody knows lavender like I do, it is very, very helpful with anxiety. So when you find strains with high amounts of linalool and get it in your body, usually those are the strains for most people that are extremely relaxing. And those are just a few of them. I can't go over all the 120 right now. That's too
Yeah,
much.
there's definitely a bunch, and certainly something worth researching personally, because as you mentioned, these terpenes, these almost like essential oils, actually play a huge part in the feeling and the taste and the smell that you experience with cannabis. So that kind of covers a question that another viewer asked, is what other ingredients aside from THC play a role in producing that high that most consumers want. And you mentioned there was a cannabinoid that did exactly that, right? It was the THCV.
Correct. That's
Yeah.
responsible for about 25% of the intoxicating feelings that we find.
Right. And then from the presentation too, CBD can sometimes like have like an opposite effect, right? It can kind of like bring down that high feeling from THC.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So even though CBD doesn't very actively bind to the CB1 receptor, which is where THC locks to, in order to give you those intoxicating feelings, it can deregulate how that receptor responds. So that means that when you take CBD and THC together, because the CBD is doing its thing to that receptor, not as much THC can bind to it. So you don't feel as high.
Okay. Let's see. Keep going through these questions. So, one of our viewers said that she's a flower girl. She prefers to smoke the flowers. But to speak of vaping, what is the best way to select a vape? In particular, she's concerned about not knowing or understanding what's inside. And I think that there's, a lot of different stuff out there. And because of some of the recent like vaping sicknesses that happened last year, I know that that's been a big concern. So March and Ash has certainly addressed that, and I'll let you go on, Anna, to tell people a little bit about the products and the vape products and how we know they're safe.
Absolutely. So that's a very, very serious concern. And so many of us, I mean, not just in the cannabis industry, we're so affected by everything that was happening when those people were losing their lives. It was very intense. So there are specific additional ingredients that have been added to those vape cartridges, something like vitamin E acetate, glycerin. There's a couple of other things. And at a licensed legal cannabis dispensary, because of the third-party testing that we have on all of our products, that's never going to exist in any of the products that we have. If anybody ever wants any of the actual certificate of analysis, which are those lab testings, you can ask for that and we will get that for you. Not a problem whatsoever. We don't want anybody to be questioning it in that way. And as far as going from flower to vape, this is one of those things that because we're taking the flower, you're smoking flower, you've got everything in there that plant has to offer, all active ingredients, unadulterated. When you go from the flower to a vape, even with some of the best extraction types that we know of, you're still separating those active compounds from the actual plant material itself. So there's still some type of manipulation that can happen, which means that it doesn't always feel exactly the same. But for some people, it's a really great option and they do like it just as much, and some people even better than flower. So as you're going from flower to vape, it's a little difficult. There are so many different types of extractions out there. I would suggest trying a couple of different kinds to see what works best for you. And if you don't know about those extraction types yet, that's what our concierges are there for. They are there to guide you the entire way through that so that you can have a better understanding of, oh, this brand is a distillate base, and I don't really like that as much as I like this one over here that is a live resin, uncured live resin. And even uncured versus a cured live resin, I get a really different effect from those two things. So I always recommend that as you are going from flower to a vape, from vape to flower, from vape to edibles, try a couple of different things to see what your body best responds to, because there are some people, distillate extraction is their thing, whether it be edible or vape, and it works the best for them. And for some people, It's the exact opposite. So lean on your concierges, ask them as many questions as you can, and know that we're always here for you if you need any fine tuning of your understanding, and just keep trying things.
The world of concentrates is vast. That's for sure. There's so many different types. We can do a whole nother webinar on just concentrates. But I do want to reiterate that, March and Ash is a licensed legal dispensary, which means that every single product from vape cartridges to flower to edibles, you name it, everything that we sell has been tested thoroughly under watch of the state, and it's approved to be sold. So a lot of times that these people were finding vapes that made them sick were from unlicensed dispensaries. So we certainly encourage you to always shop legal. Excuse me. So let's see. We'll keep going through these questions. We can take a couple more. Touching upon concentrates in that world, we have a question. What is keef?
Keef. So keef is the trichomes on the outside of the plant. So the trichomes are the resinous glands that hold all of the active ingredients in it. So say you are breaking up your ganja with your hands and you have that sticky stuff, that's keef. Those are, sorry, that was my dog. That is keef, the trichomes on the plant.
That's awesome. And you can see that within some products, right? So you can buy joints that aren't just, broken up flour, but they infuse it with all sorts of different things like keef.
Absolutely. There's joints that have keef inside of them. There are joints that are rolled in oil and then rolled in keef. There's keef by itself. Many, many options of keef. And if you're looking for keef, of course you can buy it by itself. You can also get a 3-chamber grinder so that you have a place to actually put the ganja in, a place for it to fall through as you actually grind it, and then something to catch the keef at the end of it. It usually has like a fine mesh screen on it. Highly recommend that if you are a flower smoker and you're generally trying to up your concentration, do that. Highly recommend.
It's a fun little surprise too. You get to see how it falls to the bottom.
When you have a bunch of keef and you're just rolling like or something through it, oh, it's fabulous.
Well, since your dog keeps wanting to join the conversation, a viewer has asked, do you give your dog any kind of CBD products?
I actually do. So come here, baby. I have to.
Oh,
this is so she actually has a luxating patella. That means that her kneecap, it actually moves out of place and it causes her some discomfort. So I give her a 20-to-1, and that's 20 CBD, 1 THC. I give her a tincture of that every day. She's a little picky and she really doesn't like me to put it directly in her mouth. So at night, she gets a special wet food dinner where I put the CBD tincture inside of the wet food. I want to make sure that she gets all of that medicine that I'm giving her. So I usually put it in a small amount that I know that she's just going to gobble up because she loves her wet food, to make sure that she gets all of it. And I have seen a wonderful effect for her from it. It's not completely fixed. I think it's always going to be something for her, but she can walk a lot easier now.
So you said that it's like a 20-to-1. So there's a little bit of THC in it. And that's obviously safe for animals.
So I'm not a veterinarian, so I can't say flat out, but for most animals, and especially dogs, they have a higher concentration of CB1 receptors, and that is a receptor that makes us feel high. They have an endocannabinoid system just like we do. That's why this wonderful stuff works on them. So most vets are going to tell you not to give your dogs high amounts of THC, and that the density of CB1 receptors can change per breed. So it's not to say that THC is necessarily bad for them, but they are highly sensitive to it. So talking with your vet if they're open about it. We have a couple of wonderful products, specifically vet CBD, that we sell in our store that have an amazing customer support service. You can email them with any of your questions. They even have an emergency support line if anything goes wrong. 'Cause for animals, we're generally trying to not get them intoxicated, but we're trying to help relieve whatever pain that they're in, including anxiety too.
Hmm. CBD can be a good healing tool for animals because, as you mentioned, they too have an endocannabinoid system and have their CB1 and CB2 receptors just like humans do. It's pretty fascinating.
That's right. Pretty much every vertebrate that we know of has an endocannabinoid system, and even some insects.
Wow. Well, you guys, we have reached the end of our time together. This has been an incredibly informational session, I know for me, and I hope for all of you as well. Since this is the first part of our educational series, you can certainly expect to see more webinars come from the March and Ash team here in the future. So, in conclusion, we will be sending you some follow-up emails, and we just thank you very much for your time and for joining us on our first ever educational webinar presented by March and Ash.
Thank
Thank
you so
you,
much.
everybody. Thank you, Anna.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.